did Nuh alayhi salam live for 950 years? No, he did not. Huh? You going against the Quran? You kafir? Hold your horses, people. Hold your horses. Brace yourselves. Brace yourselves. Brace yourselves. Nuh alayhi salam did not live for 1,000 years like what people think. But if you look at this verse of the Quran, okay, you're going to have to, people, brace yourselves for this. Okay. Now, Allah mentions about Nuh alayhi salam, فَلَبِثَ فِي قَوْمِهِ, that he stayed, like he was amongst his people, that he was, what is it? It mentions, what is it? أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ إِلَّا خَمْسِينَ عَامًا, isn't it? So, yeah. So he stayed amongst his people 1,000 years, except 50 years. Now what's interesting here is, why did Allah use different words to refer to the word year? So those of you that speak Arabic, and I'm sure there's some here, that why did Allah say so why did Allah say, yeah, so that's correct. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ. So let me just bring this up. Don't want to misread it. Right, so we've got this here. Yeah, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ, that we sent Nuh alayhi salam to his people. فَلَبِثَ فِيهِمْ أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ إِلَّا خَمْسِينَ عَامًا فَأَخَذَهُمُ الطُّوفَانُ وَهُمْ ظَالِمُونَ. Right, now this, for example, in Surah Ankabut. Now you've got here that Allah says we sent Noah to his people and he remained amongst them. فَلَبِثَ فِيهِمْ أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ. Right. So 1,000 sana إِلَّا خَمْسِينَ عَامًا, except 50 عام. Now sana means year and am means year in Arabic. Why did Allah use two different words to refer to year? Why did he use two different words? Right? Why not say sana, sana, am? So one obvious, one kind of thing you have is where people say that, well, oh, this is just for language rhetoric to make it sound good, so it has a flow. So, you know, Allah doesn't want to repeat the same word. Point. That's a point. We've got to be fair, it's a point. But then tell me, people, could not Allah just say 950 years? What's so difficult about Allah saying, you know, that that there is, you know, that there was, or if you want to use am, you know, or sana, just one to say 950 years. Why say 1,000 years, ألف سنة إلا 50 عام, except 50 years? Right, now this is, so some people have argued that there is a linguistic difference between sana and am. Okay, what I'm going to, now I want to highlight that difference and say that, look, this was not just mentioned as a coincidence. It was much greater than what people took it to be. So people thought, oh, this is just, Allah's just using a style. Like he doesn't want to say, you know, alfa sana illa khamsina sana, so he just changed the word. That's low level thought. I'm going to take us to higher level thinking. Okay. Recently, okay, we have, and this is recently, there's been great discoveries, archaeological findings, people, of the great kingdoms that existed, that were the antediluvian kingdoms, the kingdoms which existed pre-flood, time, especially around what would be modern day, let's say the Middle East, Iraq, like the kingdom of Sumar, kingdom of Ar, like these kind of, and what later on went on to become places like Mesopotamia and all these. But much before all of that, before Babylon, before these, you had the Sumerian, the kingdom of Sumer. So we're dating back thousands of years, and then after them they were split different kind of civilizations. So they're the kind of people who came up with things like discovered the wheel, and or discovered or created the wheel, and even split up time into 60, like let's say 60 minutes within an hour and all this kind of stuff. Now, a lot of the archaeological findings have been recently found. And they've actually, one thing that the Sumerian civilization and other civilizations did was they documented certain things extensively. And they had this thing called like cuneiform, where they would write, they had their kind of very early way of writing, which was a bit like hieroglyphics, a bit like that. And they would put that into stone, like into this kind of clay, and then harden it as stone. So it would just turn into kind of stone. So this is why these kind of tablets have been well preserved. And what they wrote these things on, these cuneiform kind of legacy that we find. So in there, they've got a lot of the rules of their kings. So, and you can find this on Google. You can go to, like, for example, the Sumerian kings and their rule. How long did they rule? So it's really interesting. When you start reading their rule, they will say, well, such and such, these three kings ruled for 300 and whatever, 60,000 years. And you'll think, what? And they'll say, and this king ruled for 20,000 years, and this king ruled for, and they seem to count like ridiculous figures. Now, at first, yes, so this is before Gilgamesh, by the way. This is before Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh comes a bit later on. Now, the interesting thing is that these people, at first people thought this was exaggeration. Then they realized actually they're going by a particular system. They're not actually just randomly making things up. They had a particular system. Some people felt that they've kind of done their own calculations. You can Google it, but they felt that maybe they times everything by 60, and hence they had this kind of obsession, ain't the right word, but this kind of this strong affinity with 60. Hence they divided the hour into 60 minutes and things like this. A lot of these things were divided into 60 for degrees and stuff like this. Now, sometimes maybe in the hundreds they times multiplied numbers when they counted. So they would say, well, such and such a king ruled for this time, and this king came, and this king came, and they had excessive numbers. And then you see the numbers start to change. These are antediluvian, which means before the flood, and then post-diluvian you start to see the numbers are still huge, but they become massively shorter in the hundreds. So you start to see that, well, the system seems to have changed. And this is what I believe that people in the Old Testament, some of the Jews had inherited in their time when they were in Babylon and these other kingdoms. Maybe they never fully understood them, but they kind of logged them in the Old Testament as such and such person being around for 800 years or 600 years. This is what it may have been. So when Allah is referring to Nuh alayhi salam, he's referring to something that of his time. The alfa sanatin is going by the time that they were using, except minus a 50 years, which would be our time, 50 years. So there is great divine wisdom in Allah mentioning the distinction between the two words. And this is not new. So you would see when Allah refers to, so for example, when Allah is referring to Yusuf alayhi salam, and the king calls him, Allah does not refer to the king as a pharaoh, because in their time the pharaoh thing hadn't been set up yet. Even though later there was the great, especially in that part of Egypt, and there was a great pharaoh dynasty, and people knew the Egyptian kings as pharaohs, but in Yusuf alayhi salam's time, They were not pharaohs yet. They were just kings. So Allah addresses them by their reality. Although when Allah speaks of Moses, he addresses him as Pharaoh. Another interesting thing, when you look at Ibrahim alayhi salam, even according to biblical sources, changes at a certain point in his life. He goes back and, between his travels of Canaan and him traveling, at a certain point, he actually changes his name. And this is part of his transformation of Ibrahim alayhi salam. But you notice that in, like for example, Surah Baqarah, all the way, when Ibrahim, the word has been written, it is omitted. It's not actually written as with the ya, Ibrahim. Although people still pronounce it, read it like that, but it's not written like that. It actually has no ya. Whereas in all the other places in the Quran, when Ibrahim is written, it has the ya. Now that's an interesting discussion. That, well, why is Ibrahim being written differently? Is this something to do with when he changed his name? Because even according to biblical narrations, he changes a variation of his name during his life as part of his transformation. What I'm trying to say is that when Allah addresses certain narratives in the Quran, at times he reflects the reality which they were upon. And that may not make sense to you at this point. And hence with time, you see, like these discoveries of the Sumerian civilization are not so long ago. They weren't discovered in the time of the early Arabs, for example, and many civilizations did not know them. These are quite relatively recent. So, and with time, the Quran unfolds its majesty with new meanings. You see, like this is what I mean. Like this is an amazing kind of feature really for people. And some people, they may not welcome this kind of a look towards the Quran, but to me this is much more grounded. Okay, so